Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today is March 26th, and you are listening and watching the Daily AA Show live. It was a little delayed coming in there. But today we are talking about Sam Altman and his conversation with Lex Fridman. And we have Beth, Jimmy, Aaron, Andy, and I'm Brian. And so we don't obviously just want to, rehash word for word what Lex and Sam talked about, because obviously you could just go listen to that podcast. But as I was saying yesterday, you might want to speed it up a bit. Both of them talk at a sort of a slow pace. If you just want a real casual, like sip your tea type of a podcast, it's great for that. But it is sort of that slow pace. And I did notice, because both of them have a bit of that, like that voice in that when you speed it up, it actually doesn't. I don't know if any of you guys, but then it gets harder to understand them because they both have that. They're not putting a whole lot of air past their voice, so then it gets really hard to speed it up, because then it sounds like this, and then it gets, and it's ridiculous. So anyway, our goal today is really just to talk about some of the concepts, some of the topics that Sam or Lex asked Sam about, and then Sam had thoughts on. And there's some really, really good nuggets in this conversation. It's about a 2-hour podcast. I should say that a good chunk of the beginning of the podcast, they do get into Sam being fired and rehired in that whole episode. And I was just saying before we went live that I really didn't feel like we really needed to spend much time on that at all, if at all. I feel like that we did shows on that. It's in the news. Anybody that's interested kind of already knows what happens. To me, that's not really what the exciting part was. He also talked a little bit about Ilya and Elon Musk in there. Also, not terribly exciting to me. I don't know. We can talk about it if you guys want to, but to me, the fun stuff was when he started talking about his thoughts about compute power and Sora and GPT-5, obviously, and things like that. So I think what we can do is just kind of grab a couple of these different topics, have a discussion about it, and try to hit, maybe 4 or 5 of those over the course of the next 30 minutes if you guys are game. So was there any, as you guys listened to the podcast, was there any one that you felt like stood out over the enough that you feel like we should start with?
I wanted to start with the compute thing, being the computer geek.
That would be my choice too.
Geek that I am. So basically, we're talking about how much computer power is. I think I go about. I'm just looking at the notes here, and they were saying that you're going to need some ridiculous amount of compute power for GPT-5, and there was a false meme out there saying that Sam had said we need 7 trillion for it, and then he said, "Oh, let's go for 8," and yada yada yada. Anyway, I thought it was really interesting because I ran across something else somewhere, and I wish I'd written it down, but it was someone that was talking about the compute that they need to run the GPUs, so the NVIDIA high-powered GPUs. There's some, like, the power requirements are ridiculous for them. They're literally talking about almost needing a nuclear reactor to run all of them together. Because the bit I remember reading was they were talking about, Microsoft was talking about the how they connect everything in the cloud so that it kind of joins together. I can forget the name of the technology they use. But literally the biggest problem they're having at the moment is that they can't get them all joined together and working. They're getting like stuttering and that kind of stuff. And so I think, I don't know that they went hugely into it, but I think for me, at least as a computer geek, the interesting part of that whole thing is just the massive amount of power they're going to need, or they're going to have to come up with a more efficient way to generate the compute, because it's not like you can just pop up a nuclear reactor next door and plug your 100,000 GPUs in and go for it. It's not going to be that simple. So I think that's a really interesting one. I look forward to seeing where that goes in the next year or two.
Yeah, I think the quote that you're referencing is if you get above 100,000 H100s strung together, you bring down the grid.
Yeah, basically.
Right? Like, it causes a not small problem for your neighbors.
Yeah. I think what I really liked about it, just to piggyback on what you're saying, Aaron, because I agree, this is the thing I found like the most interesting, was just his thoughts and concepts, our ideas on it. And I did really like, because it helped me visualize it. So I wanted to share it. He says, I think we'll think of compute like energy. And then he made a comment about saying, like, at price X, we'll do this amount of compute. and at price Y, we'll be able to do this amount of compute. So he said, maybe if price Y is at a lower price, like energy, we might look at crude oil or something. Then you might say, for crude oil, and that trickles all the way down to the gas station, you may say, oh, this summer I'll take a long car trip with my family because the price of gas is down. Now I can do that trip. It's affordable for me to do that. So I love this concept of looking at compute power the same way, that if we have a price Y, then maybe that's a whole bunch of research people saying, or research types saying, oh, at this price point, we can now devote this much compute towards the cure for cancer or whatever that might be. So I just thought that was a really easy way to understand this concept of compute. And to your point, Aaron, he was saying that, on top of the energy needs and the data center needs and stuff like that, it probably is going to push us because we'll have such a taste for, such a need and desire for more compute that will probably be what drives innovation in energy, because we won't have a choice as a society but to go back to maybe nuclear, but to maybe have breakthroughs in energy and things that he's talked about before. And it wouldn't be fusion, it'd be fission, right? That's the one which one? Nuclear fission's the one that we were the breakthrough.
Fusion is the one that we're seeing breakthroughs in.
Breakthroughs. Yeah. I always get it backwards. Thank you. So anyway, yes, but to throw it to the rest of you guys, did you guys kind of come away with the same thought processes, like what he was talking about as far as compute?
Well, I'd like to talk about that analogy you used. When gas prices would come down is when you would take that trip. It almost sounds like compute may have seasons. Much like how we have different show seasons and things like that, is because they have release schedules and things like that. So if you do have seasons, I can imagine that winter might be the compute season, merely because you don't have to pay as much to run air conditioning for your data centers if they live in further away from the equator, right? So and a lot of we've seen a lot of the build outs and the approach to this power problem from the crypto world, where they got into a lot of heat globally because they literally were generating tons of heat and were using a ton of power. I think there was a story about how it used the same amount of power as like Peru or something like that.
Right.
And so you might be running into the similar kind of conversations, but a interesting thing that came out of that was some design tech where lots of the colder countries like Iceland and Scandinavian countries and things like that could implement larger data centers because they literally could build it out on the snow,
Right.
And so I think it's an interesting thought experiment to analyze, okay, what are these potential branching of possible issues and answers to those problems.
Yeah, I don't think it's just a case of more or better energy, because that's obviously something that will happen. It's a combination. If I look at, I've been in one form or another, I've been in the computer industry for, I don't know, 30 or 40 years now. And you look at, as the chips get better, the CPUs get better, the RAM gets better, the hard drives get better, and things go up slowly but steadily, that whole Moore's law thing. But I think you'll see a combination of better energy and better compute. So whatever NVIDIA's big fancy all singing and all dancing GPU is at the moment for AI, they're going to develop something new and better, and it's just going to keep improving. And I don't even know enough about quantum computing to know whether that fits into the picture at all, but that's a whole separate story, and I don't think they talk about it. So
yeah, I think you're right, Aaron. It really does. There's a lot of analogies that I'm thinking of in the crypto space, because crypto used to be computed on CPUs. Then GPUs were a hot commodity for that, and that caused a whole bunch of indicators. Jensen may have actually learned from NVIDIA's interactions in the crypto world to keep an eye on AI. But as we saw in that world, there are focused and more specialized chips, like ASIC chips became far better at mining Bitcoin than any CPU or GPU. And we've already talked about Grok being a highly specialized language processing unit, and that runs so much more efficiently than the current chips in that specific space. And we've talked about how models are getting more compressed or smaller memory requirements. That means that's less draw on compute because it's just less storage as a whole, right? We talk about compute, but it's multiple pieces working together to process the information. It's not just here's a chip, it's the entire ecosystem or framework that works around it.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, it's like you wouldn't fire up a 747 to drive it across the street. That would be a huge inefficiency, right? And so, like what you're saying, Jimmy,
let's do it.
I think I like what you're saying, Jimmy, because I was just thinking like it is a combination of all these things, and as these models get smarter and more niche, and we're going to be talking about this on Thursday even more with this evolutionary model merge and that concept, and then just a mixture of experts and everything coming in, that this idea of firing up the largest model for simple solutions, we're moving away from that more and more, I think. So just, you're right. It's not just the energy needs and stuff. We're also becoming more efficient, like you were saying, Aaron, as well. I think there's like a crazy quote out there, right, that says there's more compute power on our iPhones now, and has been for many years, than there was for the Apollo space mission and to land on the moon. I think we've heard that before, right? So you're right. I mean, all of this is on. So anyway, there's a lot of other topics to go on to. Beth or Andy, did you guys want to throw anything in on compute, or do you guys want to move on?
Move on. I actually one of the things that struck me was the framing. Lex Friedman is like amazing at, I mean, that's why people listen to his 2-hour podcast, because he's like a really good interviewer.
Yeah.
And the wording of one of the questions, I loved the reframe in the wording. He said, what are the most glorious ways in that GPT-4 sucks? Meaning, what are the best things it can do and the limits of those best things that allow you to say it sucks, and therefore, and this is the key, gives you an inspiration and hope for the future. So we talk a lot, and so do they, about building for what's coming. And we also talk a lot, why does it suck? Oh, so much better 6 months ago. Why does it suck now? That's a fine path to go on, but it's also a really great arrow pointing in a direction, right? These are the glorious ways in which GPT-4 sucks. And let's start, or at least let's like have a notebook that we're like, okay, when it can do this, right? When it can do X, Y is going to be amazing. And so let yourself split those. I thought that was just a really interesting way of getting around some of that and getting toward a vision. And that was really what struck me, was Sam's sort of unrelenting vision of moving forward.
Speaking to that vision, I like the assertion that he wants to give ChatGPT the ability to retain memory about all of its interactions. So today there's an account that you have at OpenAI or with any one of these providers, but they're not retaining information about you that would be helpful to the AI in terms of personalizing or customizing with knowledge about you that makes it more like a human assistant. Like the human assistant learns all about you and understands your preferences and so on. And beyond preferences, it starts to, with its own intelligence, impute things to you that it may consider that you want to have happen, even though you haven't ever expressed them before. That's a really articulate and empathic kind of general intelligence that humans have. So there's that whole long range vision of making it so that you have memory available for each user something retained. But that has implications to the power requirements, storage requirements, and there's going to be something in the cloud, broadly speaking, that has to retain that information in order to make it available at the time of inference, because there's nothing inherent in an LLM that has a retained memory component. There's external storage that's required. So then that gets us to Q-star. So how is Q-star related to this long-term vision of memory-equipped intelligent assistants? So Q-star is this idea of combining a search algorithm, the A-star search algorithm, with the Q-learning reinforcement learning process. And let me explain quickly what each of those are. So let's just simplify A-star as now you're going to have a competent search capability that can scour the web. Think power requirements there as well. It's going to scour the web, and simultaneously it has the ability to provide itself with evaluative reasoning, meaning it's going to look at some of the results that are a process of its generation and provide itself with intrinsic reward for better outcomes than not. And that lets it self-improve its results without reinforcement learning from humans, RLHF. Okay, so what you get is, in the combination of that long-term vision, you get, and Q-star, which we don't really know what it is yet, but there's a lot of speculation about what it is. But we think it's this combination of search and self-reinforcing learning so that it can develop this understanding and reasoning that goes way beyond the current sort of algorithmic generation of predicted responses.
Yeah, and I liked on Q-star, Lex point blank asked him about it, and Sam's very quick response was, "We're not ready to talk about that yet." And then Lex kind of jokingly said to him, like, "Well, that makes me think there is something we need to talk about." And,
Right.
and then Sam just sort of followed that up with, like, "Well, look, I don't, at all times at OpenAI, we are attempting to get better at this problem, or better at solving this problem." And so that was sort of his answer. But to say that Q-star was brought up, but Andy, you kind of nailed it, which is to say that this is all speculation, and we think, based on some other hints and stuff like that, what Q-star might be. But the reality is, we also may all be wrong, and Q-star is something completely different, and they'll let us know, maybe, or maybe they'll never release it underneath that name.
Right.
I did want to go back really quick to the memory part of it, just because Sam had said something. Just my quick point on this was, he said, I would like it to get to know me, meaning like the language, or ChatGPT. I would like it to get to know me. I would like it to know me over the course of my life. And I thought that was just a really interesting topic or comment as far as memory goes. And we've seen in the time since we started this show, the ever expanding abilities of memory within these sentences, whether it's in context window or what they can hold, being able to take this entire podcast, a 2-hour podcast, a full transcript, and give it to the free version of Claude and get really, really close to it giving me the entire thing. Claude's Sonnet, its free version, is doing a really good job. And we'll talk about Claude on Friday for our review show, but just that's something that just simply didn't even exist a year ago. So to extrapolate 2, 3, 5 years down the road, will we have these systems that are very, very capable of remembering all sorts of conversations? Maybe they will remember everything that we've done in a workday and the conversations, and hold that in some sort of memory for rapid retrieval at the right time and the right place. And then the other side of that is that a good thing? Do we actually want that? Are there issues with the concerns of hallucinations and things? If we get all very comfortable with, well, I have this memory system and it's reliable, but it's not perfect. Well, neither are humans, but that can cause problems down the road as well. I think it really just depends on what we decide we need to hold on to. To me, it's very analogous to, I used to be like all of us. I used to know the phone numbers to many people in my life. And you do that until the point you no longer need to do that. It no longer needs to be stored in my short-term memory. because I have a very easy way of retrieving that information now. And so it would be very difficult for me if I just had to try to come off of them, except for maybe my childhood number, my dad's number, who's never changed, and my wife's number. It would be difficult for me to just rapid fire phone calls to people. There's not a need for that anymore. So what happens when we have AI and it has such a strong memory that a lot of stuff in our life does no longer needs to be held in short-term memory, because there's such a quick way to retrieve it, almost instantaneous. How do you ever win battles with your wife if she already knows all the data and is always right before you can even say, yeah, but I mean, this doesn't sound like it's going to be a good thing for me, is what I'm saying. Go ahead. Sorry, Andy.
I just wanted to add an anecdote, which is in one of the AI pin advertisements, where a woman's walking into a club and then presses the AI pin and says, "What was the song that was playing the last time I was here?" That's the memory that we're talking about here.
Right.
So Humane is experimenting, I think, probably the best experiment for adding this kind of memory to compute.
Right. Well, so that's one of the things that I think is interesting about this, because that is the analogy, right? The reason, I think you could say that the reason that we forget the numbers is because it's a compute decision that our bodies are making. It is not worth the energy to store that and be able to retrieve that when you literally no longer type the numbers, right? Like, the action that you do is either, hey, Lady Wiretap, call so and so you need to remember their name, or look it up however you structure your contacts, and so you need to know where their name is in the list, and then click the things, right? So it is actually a pretty good analogy to why we're forgetting that, and why it's important that AI have more compute the more we want it to do this stuff.
And as Sam said, we're just pushing further, closer and closer to everything being natural language as far as our interactions. And so just even the short-term memory of knowing what to press physically on a phone, on a screen, and have that haptic feedback are also kind of going to go away, because there'll just be no reason for you to remember the 6 steps it takes if the AI is so intelligent that no matter how I come across the question, it can infer what it is I'm trying to get back out of it, either because, like an Alexa, it learns over time, and it will know my voice versus my wife's voice in the house and things like that. But I definitely see that coming, where there's going to be even less need to know and where to press the buttons and what steps to take, because you'll just say, AI, I need to know this number, and it's going to say, did you mean you know that? And you're going to be like, you knew what I meant. You know what I meant. Just give me the information, and then eventually AI won't be snarky at all, and it'll just give us what we need, and you'll be like, yeah, that's what I was talking about. Like my wife, who's famously is saying turn left, almost always she means right, almost always. And vice versa. We need AI that can think ahead, 2 steps ahead, and get the right one, so my wife doesn't say, you knew what I meant. Nope.
Right.
One is one way, one's the other.
Right. When in all of our relationship AI have I ever asked about an improv rehearsal? It is always improv. I realize you can autocorrect that for other people, but get to know me.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, and that goes back to how we're all going to have those personal agents running on our personal phones, and it'll be all local, and we don't have to worry about privacy as much, because as long as our phone doesn't fall into nefarious hands, we'll be fine. Yeah.
Or it'll be a pin, and we'll be off the phone.
Exactly.
Yeah. We'll trust something else as being more secure. I don't know.
Right.
I mean,
would want to bring up. I do want to bring up one point that might be considered a minor point, but got me really excited when I heard it in the interview, was that Sam said he and OpenAI doesn't want to have these big releases. They don't want to have these huge, just drop it on, in your lap kind of moments, even though from an external perspective, it does look like that's exactly what they do. Oh, here, let's talk about Sora. What is that? Oh my, what's going on? And just reeling for people. But they had discussed about being more iterative in their releases, talking about the small moves that they make and that they can improve upon that. So to me, that was a very exciting piece, because I would love to use those little steps to try and foresee or foretell what kinds of things to expect in the future, and therefore build towards GPT-5 so I can know what to expect. It's like, oh, well, this is 4.9. So maybe 5 will be, maybe 20% like what I'm looking at now. And along those lines, which I think just gives a better indicator and allows us to adapt a little better. Admittedly, AI does move so quickly, and in technology, it's been the fastest growing technology, changing and adapting and things like that. So it's very hard for us as a society to catch up with tech in general, and AI just exacerbates that gap. But I think if they do make concerted effort in that iterative release of information, at least, I think that'll help us catch up a little better. So I was excited about that small point.
Yeah, he kind of said on that too. Just real quick. Go ahead, Aaron. Go ahead.
One of the things that kind of raised to me, which I don't think they'd really discuss, but maybe it's a topic for another show, is how much of an impact will it have on our lives if we have to remember less things and do less tasks. So the classic example you guys have mentioned is phone numbers. And I remember before we had mobile phones, you had to memorize people's numbers because you went somewhere and dialed a number, and because you used it, you kept remembering it. Now you don't remember their numbers. You just choose a name and push it. As AI picks up more and more of the slack of that kind of thing, is it going to have a negative effect on our lives in general, or is it going to be a positive effect? I don't know where I stand on that. So it could be an interesting topic for the future, but something to think about.
For sure. Okay, so we're kind of coming up on the show, but I feel we're going to go a little bit longer here, because I think there's a lot of topics in there, and maybe we can kind of, I don't know, treat this as a bit of a quick round, a rapid round, whatever, and just keep it short on these type of topics. But one I wanted to say was what you were talking about, Jimmy. He made a really interesting comment about how he kind of pushed back against Lex and said, look, did 3.5 really change the world? I don't think so. Is our world that much different today than before 4 or 3.5? And this is Sam saying this. And he said, what I think it did well was it changed the perception of what is possible with AI. And I think that goes right to what you were just saying, Jimmy, about having more incremental releases. And he kind of had this, he sort of pontificated on the podcast. He's like, I don't know, that makes me think maybe we do need to do more incremental releases, because it has a lot to do with the perception of AI. And something they talked about several times was the theatrical nature of AI. And it's something that he feels like maybe they can have a little more control of. Meaning, by the way, the theatrical nature of this getting very political, this getting, this side or that side, it's good or it's bad. And just the theater of what can happen and how that could actually really damage the public perception, the future, advancements of AI. If the public perception is like they mentioned with nuclear, if everybody's public perception is, well, nuclear will lead to another Chernobyl. Well, if that's where you think AI is going and you think it's going to lead to the downfall of the human race, that's a problem. So what he said was he maybe these more incremental releases also helps the public just adapt a little at a time. And although we might look back and say, wow, that was huge at the time, we're, as humans, we're getting really good at just moving the goalpost a little bit, and that maybe that this can help by having smaller releases. It allows everybody to adjust in time without it ever feeling like it's this huge knock in the head sort of thing. So yeah, I thought that was really, really interesting. Okay, What else? What else, you guys? I have some stuff about LLM search, about Sora, scaffolding ideas. What do you have?
I want to say that I think that process that you guys are just talking about needs to be thought a little bit more out, because my experience of ChatGPT releases to a certain extent is like stuff changes and then they tell us.
Yeah.
Right. And the advantage of like prepping for a release, which is what they used to do, right? Like, okay, we're rolling this out slowly, and now we all just sit there like refreshing every 6 hours. Did you get it yet? Did you get it yet? Did you get it yet? At least that I was sort of expecting something, as opposed to coming in and then like suddenly this doesn't work anymore. I'm now in some sort of inquiry about me. Have I changed how I'm prompting? Right? I go back in my history. I would like a little, it doesn't have to be huge fanfare, but like, hey, you're now using 4.3. And you can go back to 4.2 if you want, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
if you had something that worked, Midjourney does this, right? Like we've got
Yeah.
something. That's my thought.
You can still do it in the playground, which, by the way, that just happened to me, Beth. I was writing in the playground and getting responses to, and I said, "Oh, let me jump over to 4 Turbo," and it was worse by far. What I was trying to get for that specific result, it was worse, and I backtracked to 4, which is the great part about being in the playground, is sometimes you can do that and say, "Oh, yes, it's a new flashier model. It has a higher number on it. That means it's better." And in my case, it was not. And so having the option to backtrack to a previous model, of course, we can do this through the APIs and stuff like that as well. You always have access to some of the older models to a certain point, and then they seem to sunset them. But
great call out. I don't think about the playground. I should.
I want to comment on.
I use the playground all the time for a specific task, but I'm holding that one close to the vest. So go ahead, Andy.
I want to comment on the commentary he made about Google and search. What was interesting about his comment to me, which was effectively that, search as it exists today, we're not really competing with that. We're not going to try to be a better search. It's not about search. What you really want is to go to something that just gets you the answer rather than giving you a bunch of options for where you might find the answer. And there's no AI out there that's doing that. What? Did he not know about Perplexity? I mean, it seemed like such an oversight in his commentary, but maybe he was just not willing to give Perplexity the plug on that one, because that's exactly.
He might have been deliberately doing that.
Intentional oversight.
Lex didn't bring it up. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because I've got
something like Perplexity, and it just wasn't there. So that's interesting. And by the way, what he said was the intersection. This is the quote: "The intersections of LLMs plus search, I don't think anyone has cracked the code on yet. I would love to go do that. I think it would be cool." And then he said at the bottom here, "I don't think the world needs another copy of Google. That would so understate what this can be. Maybe there's just some much better way to help people find and act on synthesize information." So yeah, just sort of add to what you were saying there, Andy.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the passage that piqued my interest. Like, what? Why is he not aware of what's happening out there? But imagine the fire hose of information that he has to do just to stay focused, as he said at one point in the podcast. Now, he had all these other generalized interests in the world, and he has a lot of investments in other areas. But now he's really focused. He's in the game of AI, but he ought to be aware of what's going on over here, with Perplexity.
I mean, unless he's thinking even 5 steps ahead, where he knows about Perplexity, but when he's talking about search, it's not the kind of search that we're talking about. Sorry. I mean, you can really go down the rabbit hole with like trying to look the layers upon the layers of what they're talking about. I do really enjoy. It took me a little while to get used to it, but I really do enjoy Lex's approach to interviews, and he's a little cheeky too. And I don't know if this is just sense of humor or whatnot, but he'll slip in just like sneaky questions, like because he's got that really paste, kind of question things, and it's like, and when's GPT-5 coming out? And so, and just kind of deliver it in that method. And then
Yeah.
Sam's like right there, it's like, soon, not missing a beat. But I think that's I think that's what I most enjoy about especially their two reactions, is because all of the big people that he has on the show, he does this with, and he tries to gain some more information from. So I'm hoping one of these days he'll get past the defenses and extract some
someone will
juicy bit
slip
of
up and
information
drop
for
a
us.
big secret that they didn't mean to.
Mhm.
And look, I didn't really know Lex Fridman before maybe a few months ago, probably honestly with OpenAI and stuff like that. I'd never heard of the guy before. This is episode 419 of his podcast. He's been doing this for quite some time, and he is very good with his questions, which obviously is, I think he's also well respected from what I gather in the research community, intellectual community, stuff like that. Okay, we're gonna wrap this up. There's always more to talk about. We didn't get into all the topics, but hopefully this helped you. If you didn't go listen to that podcast, maybe this will entice you to go listen to the whole conversation. I highly recommend that. It was a great episode. But these are just some of the things that we sort of all pulled out. It's cool to hear that we all keyed in on a couple of similar topics, which I think is really cool. And I wanted to kind of just end really quick because I thought thank you, Greg, and thank you, Jen, for your comments. But I wanted to end on this one by Jen. And this is talking about the improve that Beth was mentioning. And she said, AI is just one big improve rehearsal. The innovation moves fast, so it's adapting, yes, and being ahead. Maybe the autocorrect isn't wrong. I just thought that was a really insightful comment. Thanks, Jen. I really appreciate that. Maybe you're right. The world is just one big improv class, and AI is right there with it. Tomorrow we have the news, guys. Thursday we are going to be talking about that evolutionary model merge. You don't know what that means? That's okay. Show up on Thursday and we're going to talk about it. It's super interesting. And then Friday we're going to be doing our review of Claude. Claude's been out for a while, but we're going to be talking about the new models, Haiku, Sonnet, and Opus. So that'll be on Friday's show. That's it for today. Hope you guys enjoyed, and we will see you all again tomorrow. Bye.
Ciao.
Aloha.